So, hi everybody. How about a big thank you to the mighty Guitar Center for letting us take over their parking lot today. The sponsors of this event, the great Remo Drumheads, ProMark Sticks, Sabian Cymbals, and DW Drums. So thank you all for being here. How many drummers, please? Raise your hand. Don't be afraid. Oh, a few of you, thank goodness, because otherwise you're going to get really bored with my dumb speak. So I was the lucky guy, one of the lucky guys that got to work with Neil to create these Paragon cymbals. And the way it started, the first day I met Neil was when he got on his motorcycle from his house in Quebec and drove down to the factory in Meductic, New Brunswick. I believe a good 11-hour drive in the rain. So he was real thrilled when he got there and had a nice little Scottish beverage and had a good night's sleep. And then we spent the entire next day at the Sabian factory banging on metal, shaping metal, trying different things. It was, you know, incredible working with Neil. Obviously, he's such an intelligent guy, and it's funny, you put something in front of him to try out, and his first response is always the same, no matter if he likes it or doesn't like it. It's which is just hilarious. Okay, do you like it? No? So where we started with this whole line up at the factory was the bell of the ride cymbal, which we thought was kind of an unusual spot. I mean, we worked with many artists to create cymbals over the years, and that was just a strange place to start. We had never started there. It was nevertheless a little unusual. What Neil wanted was a bell that would interact with the rest of the cymbal and not just be a separate instrument. Usually you hit the bell of the ride cymbal, it doesn't really resonate the whole cymbal. It's something like that. But what we had to do for Neil was get a bell that would make the whole cymbal open up. Which is what we got by luck. What we did was we threw a few things in front of him, and some of it he liked, some of it he didn't like, and he pointed out a few frequencies that he wasn't enjoying too much. And Mark Love, our master product specialist, being the genius he was, knew exactly what to do. Picked up the cymbal, took it across the road, had the bell hand-hammered by Charlie Brown. Yes, that is really his name. Even worse than my name, Stankee, huh? So Mark brought the cymbal back over across the street, put it in front of Neil, and we were lucky enough to get the whole cymbal to open up. And we had to tweak things here and there. Neil specifically, in the general focus that we created that one very long day at the factory, which is not easy to do. If you've ever, you drummers have tested out cymbals for any real length of time, your ears will wear out. So really, we spent one good day there. I don't know how he made it through the whole day. That was one of the most surprising things about Neil that I noticed was how hard he actually played. I had no idea. You see him on video. I mean, everybody's seen him on video here, I'm sure. You have no idea how hard he hits until you get right next to him. That was a big surprise. So. But what he actually wanted was a cymbal that was more dynamic, one that would open up at softer volumes. And there's an easy way to get that. And Neil had to learn all about this stuff, just like I and the rest of the product specialists did. Fine-tuning the way the cymbals respond and sound by directing the vibrations through the metal and across the surface of the metal. So in order to get a quicker response, that is, usually when you hit a heavy rock cymbal, you get a strong it gives you a real bad fundamental pitch. Microphones don't like it, but it gives you lots of high-end cut and projection, which obviously Neil Peart needs playing in front of 60, 70, 80,000 people, or whatever it might be. So what we did was we put the pinpoint tonal groove on the top of the cymbal. For those of you that don't know, that's the circles on the metal on the top side and bottom side. And when you hit the cymbal, the vibrations glide across the surface. On the underneath side, we put the wide traditional tonal grooves, and the vibrations have to crawl over those. They're withheld concentrically in the metal a little bit more, so you get a lot more high end that way. But so it's a trade-off. You lose some of the high end with the pinpoint, and you lose some of the response with the deeper groove. So again, by happenstance, it's not just as simple as putting the pinpoint on top and the wide underneath. What we did was we had to hand hammer the bells on all of these because there was still a little fundamental pitch left. Lowered the fundamental pitch just enough to make it almost unrecognizable. So Neil's setup here, he's got two 16-inch crashes up front. And you hear slightly different tones. All these are handmade, hand-lathed, top and bottom, hand-hammered, tic-tac pneumatic hammering on the bow of the cymbal, and that directs the vibrations through the bronze. The more metal that surface area that's hammered, the faster the vibrations travel through it, and you just fine-tune and tweak the sound by doing that. He has two different splashes. There's two 10s that he uses in his setup, and one 8 over here. And 13-inch hi-hats is his main hi-hats, and 14-inch X-hats. And moving over to the two very, very unique Chinese cymbals. This first one here, this 20-inch cymbal, is got the wide lathe on top and bottom. This is the perfect cymbal. You drummers who have that annoying guitar player who never plays in tune, always plays on 10, you put this cymbal about ear level, right over there next to his amps, right next to his ears, and give him this. All the high-end, piercing mid-range you can possibly imagine. He'll be deaf after one song, but he probably already is. So. The 19-inch China over here, this was the crown jewel in the Paragon setup. Neil had been trying for years to get another company to match a Wuhan China 19-inch that he'd been using for over 19 years. And they just couldn't do it. So Mark, being the genius he is up there, was able to create that type of sound using the large HHX hammering. If you take a thinner cymbal and you over-hammer it, you put a little heat in it, is what we call in the cymbal business. Gives it kind of a sizzling type of dirty tone. And it was interesting when we were in the studio developing this stuff. See, after that first day at the factory, Neil would come up to our office in the Burbank, and the building's actually owned by Steve Ferroni. He's got his recording studio right next door, so how convenient for us. So Neil would come up every couple weeks when we get a whole new box of, you know, a dozen or 2 dozen cymbals from Mark at the factory, and we'd go through them and we'd pick and try different things, and Neil would find a couple things he would like and wouldn't like, and I would take notes in drum speak and translate it to something that Mark could understand up at the factory. And when we opened this one, we threw this up on the stand. Neil made me put 4 felts on top of this cymbal and clamp it down as tight as it would possibly go. So right there I knew, wow, I wasn't paying attention to that before. I hope we got that right. And I think we got a little lucky the first time, but this, for those of you drum geeks like me, this is that cymbal you hear in, for example, Mystic Rhythms. Boom, 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 boom. Right? With me? Yeah. I know, I'm an idiot, whatever. So it was absolute joy working with Neil to create these instruments. One of the highlights of my career. I mean, you always just feel like such an idiot when you're talking to him because he's so smart. You know, he thinks about everything he says. You know, you ask him a question, and then 5 minutes later you get, well, let me offer this for your consideration. What a fantastic guy. And another fantastic guy. Let me introduce you to my friend who has teched for Steve Smith with Journey, Keith Carlock with Steely Dan, Alex Van Halen of Van Halen, and a little guy called Neil Peart. Ladies and gentlemen, Neil's drum tech, Lorne Wheaton, please.
Thank you. Thanks to Alric for allowing us to use up his parking spaces here. Back in October 2000, I got a phone call from Liam Burt, who is the longtime tour manager of Rush, and he was asking if I was available to go into the studio to record what was going to be called Vapor Trails. And so Neil had been using DW for a while for one tour, Test for Echo, which I was out on, by the way, as a tour carpenter. And so we got everything out of the warehouse in Toronto, and we moved into a studio. And there was 4 drum boards with all these flanges, of course, and there was 9 drum cases. And when I was out on the Test for Echo tour as the carpenter, I really didn't take much notice in how the drum set was set up because I didn't think I was going to be the drum tech next time. So I'm looking at all these drum boards that we put on the studio floor, and it was a whole mishmash of DW and Ludwig brass-plated hardware that was just pretty well beat up. And so I put the drum boards down, and I looked around, and I had all this hardware, and I looked around on the drum boards, and there was nothing marked to go anywhere, of course. And Liam, the tour manager, came in and said, have a nice day. So I spent about, probably the whole day trying to figure out where these things threaded into, and basically scratching my head, and as you can see, it hasn't grown back yet. So it was a case of where I didn't know where to start. So I knew where a bass drum went, and I knew where a snare went, and I knew, I had an idea. He didn't have the V-drum stuff up at the time, of course, because I got him that the next tour. But it was all this D-drum stuff, and everything, like I said, was pretty weathered. So finally I got it to look somewhat like a drum set, and I went into the control room, and Neil was talking with Ged and Alex about something, and I asked him when he had time to come on out and see if I had it anywhere close. So he finished up, and he came back out, or he came into the studio, and he sat down, and I was kind of proud, that it sort of looked like what he normally plays, and he just sat down and he went, I don't know. So, anyways, so the drum deck itself, which sits on the rotating riser, which is all aluminum for you woodworking people, is 3/4 inch Baltic birch. Myself and the not the other drum tech, the tour carpenter, George Steiner, we build these every time we get a new drum set. They're all flanges, you could probably get them at your local plumber's supply. All the hardware, DW 9000, all 24 karat gold plated. The only piece that's not 9000 is the 5000 hi-hat, which Neil likes better than the 9000. So they do all the work, they do all the threading and the inserts on the bottom for us now. We used to do it ourselves. Neil used to do it when he came up with the idea in the early 80s. But they do it obviously a lot cleaner, and it works a lot better. So the pedals also are 9000s. Out of here, bozo. And 9000 double pedals, 24 gold plated, front and back. Talking shells, we've got 13x3 piccolo DW snare drum. Starting with the toms, which when he sat down with John Good originally for this tour to commemorate the 30 years of Rush, and of Rush with him playing since '74 with the band, he wanted something special. Obviously, he was a big Keith Moon fan in the '60s, '70s until he passed away. And earlier on, he had a premier double drum set called the Pictures of Lily drums, and which was basically a friend of his drum tech's, an artist friend of his, painted. And it was pin-up dolls and the Who logos and this and that were painted onto the shells, and they were done in the framework somewhat like you see here. Neil didn't want that, obviously, because it had been done before. So he thought, well, to commemorate 30 years of Rush, why not have some kind of Rush paraphernalia or whatever on the shells? So he asked about possibly some logos from past records. So they ended up with these, which is 6 of, which could be, the Grace Under Pressure, Roll of Bones, which is the skull, counterparts, of course, Man and Star. What else here? We've got counterparts and Test for Echo, yes. Thank you. So he thought that was a great idea, and Javier and Louis, who did the paint and the graphics, did a wonderful job, as you can see. The drum set took about 8 weeks to build. I know somebody will probably ask me this question, but if you were to put a price tag on it, it would probably be in the range of about $60,000 to $70,000. That's including the Roland V drums, all the cymbals and such like that, as well as the shells and the heads, of course. So that's about the price that you would pay if you were to buy this, if you could, in a store. So going back to the shells here, the piccolos over here, the first 3 toms, the new process of these, which this was all originally done with John the first time with this drum set, trying to get what Neil was looking for sonically and visually, of course, with the paint job. So with these first three toms, he was trying to get back to the sound of the early concert toms, the high-pitched stuff, which he eventually dropped when he started playing the Ludwigs, which was two-headed toms, but the smaller drums. And they have this process that they use, which is enhanced sound edge on the bottom of these. And it's just on the bottom bearing edge. And it's a 20-degree cut versus the top bearing edge. So it allows the bottom resonant head to ring a little bit more. Versus if you have more wood on the resonant head, it wouldn't ring as much. For instance, like this. As you can see, they're tuned quite high, but he's trying to get the concert tom type high pitch out of the double head of toms. So that's getting to here, 13, so 8, 10, 12 on the sizes, 13, 15. These are your typical 7-ply, these are 8-ply. These are starting at 7-ply, both these 13 by 9. These are typical, all these are horizontal grain all the way through. They're all maple, all the drums are maple. (15 by 12). These are your typical DW shells with the horizontal grain. Starting over here, so you've got a 15 by 12, you've got a 15 by 13. He started using the second floor tom, or the floor tom on his left during the second run with the Ludwig kits. So over here, they started a method called the vertical low timber, which is everything is the same on the inside. The inside plies. They're cross-laminated from the inside out. On the outside, what they've done is they've spun the grain so that it's vertical, so it takes the stress off the shell, which gives it a lower pitch. So this is the horizontal, and you get a lot more bottom end with the vertical, the VLT. So 15 there, 16 here. Once again, VLT. And the 18. So basically he wanted all the high end, the mids, and the low stuff. And they basically got it together. And that made our front of house engineer Brad Maddox very happy, because it just makes a lot less EQing involved. With the kick drum, which is a 22 by 16, they sent us two bass drums with the kit when we originally got it. One was the regular horizontal grain. One was the VLT method. Obviously, we went with the VLT because there's a lot more bottom end to it, and it just sounded so much better to it. And then the snare drum is Neil Peart model, 14 by 6 edge, which he's very happy with. For a while we used the solid wood, 5" by 14. We used to trade between these from outdoor gigs to indoor gigs, and we finally realized the edge works in both venues, whether it be indoor or outdoor. So it just worked fine. For the electronics, which I have a rack, an electronics rack with my samplers, it's all driven with a Roland TD10 brain and XV5080 Roland samplers and Glyph hard drives that hold the memory, obviously, and load all the samplers every time it's turned on. On the left side here, we've got the Mallet Cat, made by Alternate Mode. He sometimes refers to this as the MIDI marimba. This will be MIDI'd to my rack and have samples such as the glockenspiel, tubular bells, rotating sound effects for the rotating riser, and the MIDI marimba, of course, which he likes to call it. Above that is this cowbell tree, which he's had for many years. Every once in a while, quite often actually, I have to get it welded because he knocks the crap out of it. But as you can see, it still lives, all of it. And Coming over here on the floor, we've got fat pedals, which are again triggers for the MIDI rack, front and back. They will have bells or possibly horns during the drum solo. Moving over here, which is probably the most important piece on the drum set, and everybody wonders what it is when I'm setting it up. All the stagehands or whomever is on the stage, they think it's some kind of an instrument. They think you maybe stick your finger in, and that's reserved for the sound guys that mic the drum set, because when they're working around here, they get bitten by this thing all the time. And all this thing actually is a fan, which the whole idea of this thing is, and you probably have one if you've got a furnace at home, you probably have one of these because it's the blower in the furnace. And the whole idea of this is, I've got it trained in this area so that it keeps his hands dry when he's playing. It's not necessarily to keep him cool, which it does from about here to here, which isn't a lot, but it's basically, you'll see him between songs, he'll have his hands over here, and that dries the sweat off. So I think I'll leave that on. Coming over here, we've got a 4-inch DAWs pad, which again is for samples. Could be horn shots or bell trees, whatever song they're playing. It's usually something is mapped in. Over here, we start in the V-drum world with this stuff here. We originally went with the original V-drum pads for vapor trails. It was the regular V-drum shell, red, which somewhat matched the red sparkle DWs we were already using. So we didn't bother changing anything at that point. We just worked them in and made sure he liked them, which he did very much. I had these brought in during the Vapor Trails recording versus the Yamaha kit, and he just liked to play off them. And he liked some of the sounds that was on the TD10, so we stuck with them. So for this tour, for the 30th anniversary, I talked with John Good, and I basically wanted to get more of an acoustic drum set look around the kit and have everything match. I mean, have everything match the rest of the acoustic toms with the hardware. So we thought, well, let's insert all the Roland electronics into their shells. So he made up these shells with the hardware, of course, painted it the same way. So we have a full matching kit here. So we did the same all the way back here. So you've got all the V-drum pads, all the toms here, V-cymbals, which we started using originally, the ride, the hi-hat controller, and then we had the stock upright V-drum pad at the start, and I didn't like the looks of it. It looked too electronic, so I talked with John Good, and we both came up with this idea, a 12x12 bass drum, which is an actual DW bass drum, and I inserted all the electronics in it, and you're doing a very good job, Jake. And voila, there we go. And it works out perfectly, and it actually helps. The kit looks a little bit more acoustic all the way 360. So, and they've got the cradle for it, which is the 24 karat gold. So that's all the acoustic or the V-drum stuff back here. For monitoring, Neil uses Ultimate Ear UE7 Pros in-ear monitors, which are, if you don't know what in-ear monitors are, it's like a hearing aid module. For the first tour, it was Vapor Trails. I had to talk him into trying this because he was too used to using outboard monitors, and he was getting his head blown off every night by the drum tech that used to do the gig, and he was mixing the monitors for him, and it was just brutal. So I talked him into trying the in-ear monitors, and he was sold pretty well immediately. And also Geddy and Alex used the same monitoring method. And also the heads that I use on all these drums are, hand those over to me, please. On the snare drums, as well as the piccolo, we use the Remo Ambassador coated, which we used on all the toms on the red kit before, but we have a different idea with these drums because these drums came from the factory with what they are DW crimped heads that are made by Remo, but you wouldn't be able to buy these in a store. These come on the shells from the factory. And there's a reason John Good had them designed, because they sound the best on the shells. And that's the whole reasoning behind that. So, and it's a crimped head, by the way. It's like a marching drum head. And then on the kick drum, we have, once again, a Remo Power Stroke 3 clear with a little Flam Slam double pad on it, just to give it a little bit more attack. On the front head, I tune it a little higher to get a little bit more of a point to the bass drum, which helps the front of house engineer and the monitor guy, and as well, you can hear better in the monitors, in the ear monitors. I think that's about it. His first Tama kit, he decided, he was doing a lot of work with Modern Drummer, and he decided to have contests, well, between Modern Drummer and Neil, of course. They decided to put up contests for giving away his old drum set, his stage sets. He did that with one of the Tamas and one of the Ludwigs, and I think the first one was for the best drum solo from not an amateur, but somebody that would send in tapes. And I guess a gentleman in I think Pennsylvania or something like that won it. And if you were to get the drum magazine, the new episode, the new edition with Neil on a version of Neil Peart on the cover, it's got that information in it. But that's what he did a couple of times. I think it was the Candy Apple kit and the first Ludwig kit he did that with. The Counterparts kit, which I had to put together again because Larry had given everybody, all his relatives and everybody else, the drum set, different parts of it. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame called up, even though they'll never end up in it for some reason. They wanted some of our equipment, so we said, yeah, fine, whatever. So I built the Counterparts drum set, which was the Black Cherry Ludwig kit, the last one, when he had the rack toms out here and the ride was over here. But the problem was Larry had given drums to all sorts of different people, so I had to phone these people up and say, hi, I'm the new drum tech, and can I have the drums back? And they all said, piss off. But I ended up getting them all back, amazingly enough, and I somehow got all the hardware together, and we were retiring the first revolving riser and the drum boards, so it worked out pretty well. It took me about 3 weeks to build this thing, and if you had a blown on it, it would have fallen over, but we managed to make it look like his drum set. And we gave it to them, and they had it on display for about a year or whatever. And since then, they've shipped all that. We gave them all the double neck guitars and all that stuff, the Ricky and the Gibson. And since then, it's all gone back to Ottawa.